Java to JavaScript tutorial number 7, RequireJS and Bootstrap 4. In the last tutorial, we have a partially running web application. One of the jQuery UI's widgets is running properly. That is the one that we use for demonstrating that jQuery UI is working. Since jQuery UI depends on jQuery, so we have jQuery library loaded before jQuery UI using RequireJS. In this tutorial, we are going to talk about RequireJS and Bootstrap 4. As we discussed in the previous tutorials, Bootstrap 4 libraries depends on jQuery.js and Popper.js. So we must configure RequireJS to load jQuery.js and Popper.js before Bootstrap 4 library can be loaded. Stay tuned for some of the tricky configuration that we need to do in order to set up RequireJS to load Bootstrap 4 properly. Let's get started. Welcome back to the tutorial of integrating Bootstrap 4 and RequireJS. Let's start the application. npm run dev. Okay, so the application is started and browser is opened. The slider is working, just like last week. However, our drop-down button is not working. So let's fix that. Let's go to the editor. We know that the drop-down button is one of the Bootstrap 4 widget. So right now, let's install Bootstrap 4 library. But before we do that, let's clean up the source code. So let's go to the main.js, our main configuration for RequireJS. Let's remove the jQuery and jQuery UI and this slider JavaScript. So we only need to load in these two JavaScripts, the proper.js and bootstrap.js. Let's take a look at the proper.js and bootstrap.js in the node modules. So under the node modules, let's go to proper.js. So in here, we take a look at the proper.js distribution library and UMD, and we are going to load the proper.js right here. In terms of the Bootstrap 4, let's go to the Bootstrap distribution folder, JS Bootstraps. We can either load in minifications or without minifications. So let's do that. All right. So let's put in Popper.js. The reason why we cannot put in Popper.js like this is because if we put a file with an extension .js right here, RequireJS would think that this is the file rather than the shortcut path. So we cannot do that. So let's remove the dot. So we have the Popper.js. Let's copy the entire path. Again, in here, we have to leave out the .js extension because RequireJS can only handle JavaScript libraries. Paste that. Bootstrap. Same thing, just copy the entire path. And let's put in the minified version for now. All right, let's save it. Let's check. So the slider is working, but the drop-down button is still not working. Let's take a look at the debugger to see what's going on. Let's reload. So right now what we have is RequireJS, main.js, jQuery UI, and then jQuery. And last week we already talked about why we can actually reverse the order and still works. If you would like to know what's going on with this, please take a look at the last week's tutorial. So the Bootstrap library and the Popper.js library are not loaded at this point. So what we got to do is put in the Popper.js and Bootstrap.js right just like last week when we put in the jQuery UI library. So let's do that. Popper.js and Bootstrap library. Let's save it and see. All right. So what we have here, we have already loaded in proper.js, Bootstrap main.js, and jQuery.js. However, Bootstrap.js depends on both proper.js and jQuery.js. So we have to load jQuery.js before Bootstrap.js. Otherwise, it won't work, as you can see here. All right, so let's go back here. Let's add the shims for Bootstrap. And we need jQuery and proper.js. All right. In this case, since we have already put in the dependencies for Bootstrap.js, so we can remove the proper.js right here. Let's remove that. Just like last time when we removed the jQuery right here, when we put in the jQuery UI. So let's save it. All right, let's see whether the button works or not. The button is still not working. But we have already got jQuery, proper.js, and then bootstrap.min. All the JavaScript are low in the right order. Let's click on to the console to see what's going on. Okay, so we have Bootstrap dropdown require proper.js. And then it's on line number 6 for the Bootstrap min. Well, when we are doing debugging in terms of loading of library and clicking on the actual code within the library, if we click on this, since bootstrap.main.js is a minified version of the Bootstrap library, so the source code is kind of hard to read. So we have no idea what's going on in here. Alright, so what we gotta do is load in fully expanded version of Bootstrap library by removing the min. So again, it doesn't work. Alright, so in here, this is the line that throws the error from the console. Alright, so the error is proper is undefined. We know that proper.js is already loaded. However, the global variable proper is not defined. And this is the way how one library is using another library. Usually is integrated by the global variables. How are we going to solve that? We know that we can require a library and provide a callback once the library is loaded. So what we can do here is require, and then we put in proper.js. So when this library is loaded, we'll run a callback function. And inside the callback function, we take the variable proper from the loading of the proper.js. And then we associate with the window.proper to this proper variable. The way it works is we load the proper.js, and at the end, it will export the proper global variable. And the global variable is passed to this function as a formal parameter. And then we assign the global variable proper from this library to the windows.proper, which is the global variable for the window of the browser. And from this point on, any libraries that is loaded after it will see this global variable. And since by loading the Bootstrap right here, we are loading the jQuery and proper.js. So by the time the proper.js is loaded, this global variable is set up, and then it is set to the Windows proper. And thus the Bootstrap should be able to take this global variable and use it. Let's save it and see. So now let's close that. Let's take a look at the console. Okay, so we don't have any problem. So we know that popper is defined in the global. And the drop down button works just as Bootstrap library described. Let's see what happens if we move this around. Let's move this to the bottom of the JavaScript. Okay, let's save it. Same thing, it works. The reason is when RequireJS take a look at this configuration file, it will go through it, register with the callback based on the library that is being loaded, since RequireJS will load each library at most once. As soon as it sees that, okay, we need to load the Bootstrap right here, then we need to load both jQuery and popper.js first. However, the popper.js has a callback function that is defined in here. So this will be executed when the popper.js is loaded, before the Bootstrap library is being loaded. So that's how it works. That's it for this tutorial. See you next time.